And the topic today is about being fully known. I am known because he is God. That's the topic. And I don't know about you, but I've had my fair share of very awkward social experiences. Can be very awkward sometimes. And I remember one time last year, my college, so I'm trained to be a vicar, and they have like an open day every year. And sometimes people come from quite a way away, and they come and stay at the place. So I was hosting someone, and they came on the Friday night, and then the open day was a Saturday, and they were going to get a train Sunday. So I gave him some lunch on Sunday and took him to church, and gave him a lift to the train station. And we got to Facebook friends, but that was it. Like nothing, we weren't super close. And his name was Dan, and a couple of days later, I really wanted to catch up with a friend of mine from home, who I know quite well, also called Dan. And I went on the old Facebook, as you do, and I think some of you can guess what happened. But I wasn't really paying loads of attention. I think I was multitasking, not very well. And I just messaged my friend, or who I thought was my friend Dan. I was like, hey, mate, fancy a catch-up? And I got a reply saying, okay. And so I just called it, and it wasn't until I saw his face that I realized I'd called the wrong person, and it was just very awkward. And I think where most people would have said, sorry, I've called the wrong person, I was too embarrassed to do that. And instead, we had a very awkward conversation, catching up about, all of his 2 days, so I hadn't seen him. And it turns out I had a good train journey, and that was about it. And it's very awkward. And I know that sometimes I think some of our biggest desires as people is that we'd be known. But it's also kind of our biggest fear, because sometimes I think we can project this image of ourselves that we want to be seen as, and yet it's not true. And we can be scared that if people really found out who we really are, they wouldn't like us. And sometimes I think we can also project a kind of weird sense of knowing and not knowing about us and God. Like, he knows all about us, and yet sometimes we're a bit ashamed to come before him. Or sometimes we're just a bit embarrassed and we feel like we can't worship him or something. And today, I want to look at a passage in the Bible from John's Gospel, and it's John chapter 4, and it's a story that happened, and Jesus met this person, the woman at Samaria, the woman at the well. I don't know if some of you might have heard of it, some of you might not have, but I think it's a corker. And essentially, I'll read a bit to you in a minute, but to set the scene, Jesus is on his way from somewhere to another place, and he's and he has to go through this place called Samaria. Now, Jesus was a Jew, and the Samaritans were they used to be Jews many, many years ago, but some complicated stuff has happened, and the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. Like, imagine two football teams that hate each other, like Southampton and Portsmouth, but times like a million. Or maybe Brexit voters and Remainers times a million. Like, they hated each other. And to give you an idea, from where Jesus was going, he had to go through Samaria, and it would have had to be about 70 miles. And Jesus went straight through Samaria. But lots of Jews, to avoid going through that place, would do 140 miles just to avoid them. They hated them so much they'd be prepared to walk that far. And we pick up the story in John chapter 4, if you want to follow. And verse 4. Now he came through Samaria, and he came to the town in Samaria called Sychar, and near the plot of the ground that Jacob had given his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon. Now, it's about noon, so the hottest time of the day. And the next bit says that a Samaritan woman came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? Now, we can read that, and it can seem pretty straightforward. Like, Jesus had a long journey, okay, and he goes to the well, and he asks for a drink. But if this was like a sitcom, this would be like, this was a big drama moment, because this woman was a Samaritan. And so they she hated the Jews, and them, they did not get along. And also, back in those days, it was illegal. It was like not the done thing for blokes to talk to girls out in public, especially if they didn't know each other. And especially if it was a religious leader like Jesus, he was, sort of supposed to be holy. And so to talk to someone who was unclean and a woman was outrageous. And Jesus actually speaks to her. I'm amazed that sometimes when I feel like I've just done so wrong, I feel like I'm dirty, I feel like I'm not worthy, Jesus still has time to speak to this woman. And Jesus still has time to speak to us too. And more than that, Jesus actually values her. I mean, it seems a bit weird that it would be giving someone value to ask them for a drink. But in those days, that would be giving them value. But this woman wasn't like any other woman, because she was there right in the middle of the day, the hottest time. Most women in that day would have gone to get water probably the very beginning of the day, or just as it began to be evening, to avoid like the really hot sun. And she was there. Do you know why she was there? Because she was trying to avoid everyone. Like, everyone knew this lady for some reason. We're not told exactly why, but probably something a bit dodgy. Maybe she's been sleeping around a bit, or maybe she's an outcast. And you can imagine just the villagers, the gossip they had about her and the scowls that she got. So she tried to avoid that by going in the middle of the day. And Jesus spoke to her. And again, this is when Jesus takes what is really ordinary and turns it upside down. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it was that asked you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you better than our father Jacob, who gave us a well and drank from it himself and as his sons and livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I will give them will never thirst." See, this woman thought that she was coming to that well to get some water. But what Jesus wanted to give her, what Jesus was inviting her into in that moment, was something that is far better than water, something that will satisfy her beyond her imagination, something that will change her life. And and you can see that the woman is keen for this. You think, oh, if I never get thirsty again, that'd be incredible. And she said, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and that I can keep coming to draw water." And you can see that there's a bit of shame coming. She doesn't want to have to see the rest of her community. She doesn't want to have to go to that well. And she thinks that the answer that Jesus is giving is going to make her stop do that. And Jesus kind of turns it on the head, and he very subtly says, "Go and get your husband." He knows a bit more about this lady. And she says, "I have no husband." And Jesus then replied, "You're right." Well, here we are. "You're right, you don't have one husband. In fact, you have had 5. And the person you're now living with is not your husband." Now, I think there are 2 ways we can read that. Firstly, there's sassy Jesus. Like, "Oh, no, you didn't. You don't have 5 husbands. You've got 5, and you've lived this awful life where you've been promiscuous and you've done all this wrong, and I'm calling you out on your sin, and now you can repent." But actually, in those days, things were a lot different. Women just didn't have many rights at all, and it was just not fair. Only blokes could divorce women. Like, it was only that way around. So this poor lady, we don't know what she'd done, but she had massive rejection. Not just once, not just twice, but 5 husbands who had all given her this simple certificate saying, "You're divorced. You have nothing to do with me." It wasn't a 2-way process. And more than that, the guy she was living with at the time wasn't even committed enough to marry her. Like, she was expecting him to just be like the other ones. She's at this well, she's lonely, she's rejected and isolated. And Jesus meets her, and he calls her, and they had this conversation, and Jesus knows her deeply. And what happens next is amazing, because Jesus then goes on to teach her. And up until this point, Jesus had kept it like a massive secret that he was God's son. Like, every time he healed someone, he'd be like, "You're healed, but don't tell anyone." But this one woman who was a nobody in society, Jesus told him like the biggest secret. He said that I am the Son of God. She's like, "Oh, someday the Messiah's going to come." And he says, "I am he." And then she goes from that place completely healed, completely restored, and she can tell the rest of her village. So she goes out to tell the men in her city. Can you imagine what that must have been like? The very people she was afraid of, the very people who'd hurt her massively, she then went to that place and told the good news of Jesus. And that woman, that outcast, became the very first evangelist, the very first church leader. Jesus turned it upside down. Guys, he knows us. We don't have to pretend with him. I know sometimes in my life I've just been kind of pretending, going through the motions about being a Christian. I grew up in church. I knew the right words to say. I knew how to do it. But deep down there are some stuff that I hadn't dealt with God. And, it was the most amazing thing when I got to that place where I knew that I just knew that I knew that I knew that he loves me. That's true. He loves us. And we can come to him. And sometimes our sin, we think that it's just a case of what we really want to do, but we're not allowed to do. Like, you're a good Christian, you don't do that. But that's not what it is. Like, sin is the stuff that we do when we're not satisfied with God. Jesus said in that passage that he will give the living water which will not run dry. It will well up within you. That gift, it represents the Holy Spirit who's come to be with us. He lives in us. And I wonder whether tonight God might want to meet us. Maybe he wants to refresh us. Maybe for some of us, I think there's been some rejection, that we feel like we're a bit outcast. We feel shame. Maybe you feel like you just don't really fit in anywhere. Tonight, I just want us to hear Jesus saying that he knows us and he loves us.